Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of our DataBasic podcast. I'm Alexandru, the president of the Warrior Data Science Society, and today we have a very special guest joining us. It's Javier, the founder of Hal9, a company focused on democratizing artificial intelligence. With an impressive background in AI and experience at renowned companies like Microsoft and RStudio, Javier brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our discussion. In this episode, we'll delve into Javier's journey, exploring his motivation, experiences, and significant role he played in the development of Hal9. We'll explore the impact of his background and work experiences on his decision to start a company dedicating to making AI accessible to all of us, while having fun chatting about communication skills, job promotion, and philosophical fundamental questions like what's AI and what's data science. So let's dive right in.
Hi, Javier. Welcome to DataBasic, the Warrior Data Science Society podcast. Alexandro and I are hosting it today, and we're very, very excited to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us.
Same here. Thanks for having me, Ria and Alex. Really looking forward to this.
All right, thank you so much. Maybe could we start by everybody introducing themselves and saying where we're joining from? I think it's quite interesting, and we haven't really explored that much during our previous episodes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm Javier Luraschi. I'm joining from Seattle. I've been here for many, many years now. Originally, I'm from Mexico City, and then part of my family is from Italy. But I moved here to work at I moved here to work at Microsoft and Microsoft Research, RStudio, and now we're doing our own company.
That's great. I'm Alexandru. I'm joining from the outskirts of Coventry in Earlsdown. I'm studying at the University of Warwick. I'm actually doing data science. And yeah, I can't say I moved here to work yet, but who knows? Maybe in the future I'll move to London or some other places to do some amazing stuff like yourself.
Hi, I'm Ria. I'm studying Masters in Business Analytics at the University of Warwick. I'm currently located in Coventry, United Kingdom, and I'm originally from India. I came here to study.
Yeah, I forgot to add, I'm from Romania, and all the Romanians love Italy and Italians, and so that's why I was laughing when you're saying that part of your family is from Italy, because it's so I'm not sure how, but the Romanians really have a good connection with Italians, and they love to go and visit Italy. Anyway, thanks for coming again, and maybe can we briefly talk about university years, maybe what you've studied and why you've moved on to Seattle and work at the companies that you've mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. So I've always been super passionate about software engineering. When I was a kid, I was like, when I grow up, I want to build a video game, right? That was my goal as a kid. So I always have this passion for software engineering. But then as I was getting closer, high school, I also really loved mathematics. And now secret here is like I've never been super good at mathematics compared to software engineering. But then I decided I really couldn't choose between, hey, should I study software engineering or mathematics? So I ended up studying both in two different universities, both universities in Mexico. One is a smaller university called Universidad Panamericana. That's where I started software engineering. The other one is more world-renowned. It's called UNAM, which is the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, which is like the biggest, one of the
biggest.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's. I mean, don't quote me on this, but it's probably the biggest funded university in Mexico, if not Latin America. And that's where I studied mathematics, and it's one of those things that I've always really loved. But I don't have like that innate, just skills on mathematics. Like this is something that I really have to work on, and like it was much harder to study mathematics than software engineering because one came natural to me, the other one was just a lot of grinding and a lot of like hard work there. But yeah.
That's so interesting because for me it's the other way around. Like I knew from high school and until high school I knew that I'm really good at mathematics and I love physics. But then at high school we started doing some computer science, some programming, some introduction to the world of computers, and all of my friends were into it because we were a class that was specializing on it. So I started uni back in Romania doing computer science and engineering. but then I was really grinding with that, and uh, it was not only that it was hard for me, but the system itself, it was a bit too robust and it didn't allow me to do whatever I wanted. So that's why I moved to do data science, and now I'm actually studying math stats with focus on computer science as well, which I find is quite hilarious that you're kind of in the same position, but the other way
Yeah, the
around.
opposite.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
for sure.
I'd like to move on to some AI questions now, if you don't mind, because studying, like looking at your profile on LinkedIn, I kind of did a bit of stalking. I hope you don't mind. Uh, I like obviously with with speakers that we're inviting on podcast, we try to look for different areas and how they apply some data science or AI in their job related field, or if they're studying their own, either they're starting their own startup as you and other previous people, or they're just using it as a tool, because sometimes AI can be just a tool for some people. They don't really build any models. They don't really, I don't know the behinds of it, but they they use it on the regular basis and they have a good impact with it. So if you don't mind, can you maybe give us some the can you can you tell us when was the pinpoint, or like when was the bang for you when AI started to be interesting for yourself?
Oh, yeah, that's the AI questions are super interesting because they're so broad and it means so many different things to so many people. So my dissertation when I was back in school when I was doing mathematics, I was always interested in neural networks, and neural networks back in the day, they were just 2 or 3 layers. This was before Jeff Hinton, and the whole industry figure out a way of doing deep learning, right? So it was literally neural networks, 2 layers, kind of like you can think about them as linear regressions connected with a nonlinear function. So my dissertation was about recognizing facial expressions with neural networks, and it was, I don't remember the exact number of neurons, but might have something like 1,000 in the first layer, and then 400 or 200 in the second layer. So it was very, very small compared to the things that we do today. I think at that point, honestly, I don't think I could even consider it AI, just because AI, back in the day, when I was at school, AI was mostly Russell's Peter Norvik's book. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But traditional AI were agents and searches, and breadth first search and A-star algorithms and just planning. That was what was considered AI back in the day. So to me, like doing neural networks was super interesting, but I don't think I consider it AI. So I think to me, I'm trying to think where really I realized that I was interested in AI, because I've been interested in AI since I was in school. I just didn't know that that was what we consider AI today. Probably, I think when I was in Microsoft Research, I had a chance to work on a deep neural networks project, and I think that's when things started. This was around, if I recall correctly, like 2013, and I feel like that's when it's like, oh, I did neural networks back in school. Now we're doing deep neural networks. It seems like this is AI, right? But to be honest, I think it's worth mentioning taking over the world, and it's like, what does that mean, right? And then when you think about data science, right, and you do something like a linear regression, which is just drawing a line over points, right? That's also creating predictions, and it's a model, right? And the question is, is that AI, right? And it's like, well, you could argue, well, that's not AI, right? And then you look at the neurons on a neural network, and it's just kind of like linear regressions connected with a nonlinear function, right? So I do feel like the whole AI term is completely overloaded with whatever comes to people's mind. Is So it's very, very subjective. We could talk about what really AI means, but I would say that, at least from my personal journey, when I was on Microsoft Research, that's when I started hearing, oh yeah, we're doing actually AI, right? And since then, I guess I've been on the AI space, but it's super not well defined. If some of the features that I work on, right, should those be considered AI or not? I don't know. I think that's for the community to decide, or someone else. But is I don't know, how do you guys understand AI in general? I mean, is there like something that comes to mind when you say AI that it's more clear?
That's actually a really good, like I like how where you're turning this on. I would just add quickly. I've been to some to an SU like student union exec training today, like with the societies and stuff. And I heard something really controversial, and it kind of triggered me a bit. So I think there was a student that was doing an engineering degree, and I'm not sure what he was talking about, but then basically he just threw this thing at me. He just said that, oh, what's AI? I really hate AI. It's just predicting stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, that's his perspective. Okay, it's not. I can't argue it's false because indeed it's predicting things, is estimating things. But as you said, like there's not. I think there's not really a clear definition of what this
Yeah.
or the subject contains. And again, data science and AI, it's usually seen as really broad. And it for some it can be just some estimation. Maybe some people are just doing some forecasting for the revenue, or because that's one of my cousins. That's what one of my cousins told me as well. Like when I was telling her that I'm doing data science, she said that, oh, I did that in econometrics. I was doing some forecasting as well. I did AI too. Like, okay. If you say so, that's true. But for me, I think I can't draw a line. As you're mentioning, deep neural networks might be a good representation of it. And it's funny to say. It's funny that I heard you talking about 2014, because I was doing. I meant to do a talk tomorrow, and I was doing like a history of AI. And one of the things, it was around 2012 or something, when AlexNet was introduced, and a lot of people started using that. So it's clearly something that's been developed a lot in the past few years.
Yeah, Javier, I definitely agree with your point. Now, just coming back to your professional trajectory, if you could tell us a little bit about your role in, Microsoft RStudio, and how did this lead you to starting up yourself? Could you just give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, for sure. So it's all related with, I went to school, studied mathematics and then software engineering. So like when I got an interview at Microsoft, I had a few products to pick from, and the one that picked my attention, I think on my subconscious, because it's not that I overly rationalize this when I was making that decision, but there was a product inside the Office team called Office Access, which basically the role of this product was to empower people to process data on their desktop. So it kind of like used to be like a database connected with a drag and drop user interface, kind of like Tableau. If Tableau came with its own database, and you could like ingest CSV files and just data, and then drag and drop to build applications and do some data analysis and reporting. So to me, that product felt really interesting. I think in retrospect it's obvious, because it's like, well, you need to write code to do like not really mathematics, but like data analysis. So that was the beginning of it. And I picked that product. I had to move from Mexico and here, and like a lot of things changed from a personal kind of like less professional, more personal point of view. But yeah, I started on that product, and then my journey inside Microsoft was more along the lines of getting closer to doing more data processing. And also I realized that I like working with smaller teams. So I moved from Office to work at Microsoft Research, mostly honestly because it felt fun. Like I think, again, there's many things that sometimes a lot of times you take professional decisions or life decisions and you don't know why. Because, to me, it was just like, well, I've worked in Office for a while. Like I should, Microsoft Research looks fun. I should explore that. But I think there was something more fundamental behind it, which now I realize and I understand that I really like startups and doing things from scratch. But at the time, I really didn't know about it. I was like, oh, the guys from Microsoft Research seems to be doing some really cool math and data processing. Like I should join them. So while I was there, I worked on a few different projects, but some that stand out. One was about doing deep neural networks with the researchers, right? And again, like I joined there as a software engineer, so my role was there to help researchers with the software engineering part of it, right? And a lot of them, they would one of the projects was called Project Adam, which back then I think it was around 2013. We weren't really sure that GPUs were the way to go. There were still a lot of like, well, maybe if we use CPUs, there's better ways of utilizing it, and like it still could be possible that CPUs might be the way to go. So it was too early on. So a lot of the projects were, okay, how can we build deep neural networks with CPUs at scale with many computers, like thousands of computers connected, doing all that. So that was one of the projects that I work on. And anyways, I got the chance to build one of the first apps that help you recognize objects. And back in the day, again, this is 2013, the app that I built recognized what type of breed of a dog was in a picture, right? So you could take a picture and be like,
big. Yeah, that's quite big.
Yeah, and yeah, it was super interesting. But again, back in the day, we just, well, not me, but like the research community figured out really how to outperform in tasks like for computer vision with ImageNet and AlexNet, you mentioned, Alex. So it was just the very beginning, and we really didn't understand at that point what was deep neural networks good for. Like this demo of like, hey, let's recognize the breed of a dog felt like pretty cool, because it's like, well, we can recognize any object, but what's the applicability of that? So we really didn't know what was coming. We were just anyway. So I work on that, and I also work on a project with Apache Spark, which is one of these projects to do large computing, with many computers, right? Which is related with Project Adam. Like, how do you process data when it doesn't fit in one computer? You need to have like multiple ones. So to me, like it was all about working on things that I like to work on, but they were always around how can we use data processing and computer science to solve problems, and that kept me entertained for a while. I think Microsoft Research is a great place to work. It's a great institution, lots of smart people there. But I was also there for a few good amount of years. So at some point I was like, okay, like what's next? And that's when I decided to leave Microsoft. Yeah.
And just a quick one. Is this team still existing in Microsoft right now, or do they just move it in another department, or how would you find it right now? Like, well, if people are interested in applying for such a role, for example.
Yeah, I mean, well, Office, the product obviously is still there, like Excel, PowerPoint, and I don't even know what they do today, because there's so many. I think now there's designer.office or whatever. So there's definitely Office is still well and alive. I think Office Access, it is less of a, it's more of, from what I understand, don't quote me on this, like go to the Microsoft website, but I think it's more of on maintenance mode.
Okay.
And Microsoft Research obviously is still there, alive and well. And I don't understand, it has been more than 7 years since I was in Microsoft. So I'm sure things have changed a lot, but I know that Microsoft Research is also there. And there's really no team in Microsoft Research. Like, things spin up so fast that, I do feel like there's less of a brand of teams inside Microsoft Research, and it's just more like the overall organization is Microsoft Research. But yeah, obviously Microsoft Research is there, and people are more than welcome to apply. I'm sure there's job openings on their career portal, and they definitely not advertising for Microsoft, but I'm sure like there's opportunities there for people interested in that.
Yeah, I'm just coming back to the thing that you mentioned with the CPUs versus the GPU, the processing thing. Like, I was curious, is it any similar to how you distribute the computing power on a GPU, or is it fundamentally different on how you use more CPUs altogether? Like, I'm curious if you can just briefly describe it.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's pretty, always looking at these questions in retrospect is, it's so obvious, because, obviously GPUs are better than CPUs, right? So, like they won, and, and in general, FPGAs, right? And it comes down to how do you parallelize processing, right? Because when you look at a neural network, and hopefully, I think some of your listeners are familiar with these terms, but a neural network really has a lot of nodes, and each of the nodes on a neural network are mostly independent on each other on many of the operations. Or, when you have three neurons connected and another tree, you can do the calculations independently until you get later stages on the neural network, everything converges. So is really about parallel processing. So I would say that on a fundamental level, in theory, CPUs and GPUs both should parallelize, because at the end you have transistors, right? And it's just like, how do you arrange them in an efficient way, right? And I think the fundamental difference is that a CPU is really fast and at doing many types of operations, right? And many complex one, and they're usually optimized, well, especially things like the Intel x86 family of processors. They actually they have high level functions like video encoding and also matrix multiplication, and so they're very complex things that process everything, right? So I think the challenging thing is that a lot of the CPUs back in the day were not really just used for doing mathematics or matrix multiplication, but also have like all this overhead of like encodings, video encodings, and anyways, I'm not an expert on processors. And so it really comes down to, if you have to do many things in parallel, like many matrix or many matrix multiplication or many operations in parallel, how do you do them more efficiently, right? So I don't think there's really anything wrong with using CPUs, but the problem is, like, in order to parallelize CPUs, you also need to connect them somehow, right? And usually that means you need to connect them either through the network, right, which has overhead, or you need to somehow connect the CPU directly to the other CPU, so you can scale and have like computers with hundreds of CPUs, which are still pretty efficient. But like, when you look at a graphics card, it basically at the end it still has you can see the GPU as having a CPU, right? But that CPU is optimized for processing data in parallel, right? So I mean, at the end we're moving electrons, and those electrons are making mathematical operations to calculate, say, matrix multiplications. But in one case you have the overhead of the operating system, maybe network drivers, or like, even if it's multiple CPUs, they need to interconnect, versus on a GPU you kind of like are putting all of that in the same chip that processes things in parallel, right? So I don't think it's really, I think it's almost like a term that we invent, like CPU versus GPU, because they're not that different fundamentally, right? At the end, CPUs can process multiple data in parallel. It's just the degree of parallelization where the GPUs have, I don't quote me again on this, but like, I don't know if it's to the point of billion of transistors that can work in parallel versus anyway. So but yeah, I think it's pretty clear now that GPUs, or strictly speaking, things like FPGAs, or basically circuits that are specialized in doing this type of parallel operations very efficiently, that are very simple, won the race. But anyways, I think we we went to that tangent, and definitely anyone doing AI probably will face themselves with having to find GPUs just because they won the race in that sense. But they're not that different from CPUs, I think.
But it's still interesting to discuss it, and maybe to make the audience better understand why the switch and why we chose to use one against each other. So thanks.
Yeah, I mean, if you let me add something here that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, sure.
If you look at the new Apple cores, like their new CPUs, right? They come with a neural engine inside the CPU, right? So they have the CPU, but inside the CPU, they put pretty much kind of like a little GPU where it's specialized. So, in that sense, like, that distinction between CPU and GPU really blurs when you start optimizing a CPU. But yeah, like, I think the distinction is pretty clear, where a GPU is mostly for parallel processing, a CPU for serial processing. But today, like, those two are converging with processors like the M1 and M1 Max and all the, whichever name Apple, gives them. Those things are still also converging today. Yeah.
No, that's true.
Javier, I had a question from the business perspective. So from your time at Microsoft, did you have instances where you had to communicate with stakeholders and try and explain something in lay terms so that they actually understand the product and the intelligence that has gone behind it, whether it's using neural networks, especially for image recognition? And if you could also tell us, to deploy a particular product, especially for example the one that you built, what does the monitoring and validation monitoring process look like till you get the final buy-in from the team?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think in the context of Microsoft, I've been an engineer for many, many years. And honestly, I was all years, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but we have a passion for, working on the nitty gritty things. And then honestly, it's a lot of overhead to be thinking on, very specific things like neurons and, like code and GPUs and drivers, and then communicating up is kind of like a different part of the brain. So I think throughout all my time in Microsoft, I was not effective at communicating, to stakeholders. And to be fair, I think one of the ways that you can grow on a company like, just not just Microsoft, but just generalizing tech company, I think advice that I would give to fellow engineers is that unfortunately, there is value in learning how to communicate things, right? And to me, at the time, it felt very silly because, like I want to solve the hard problems, technical problems, right? Like that's what I want to do. But then if you solve a hard problem on a product and you cannot communicate that it was hard and it has value, like no one knows about it. How are you going to get promoted, right? It's really, really hard if you think about it. Like if, for instance, if, this didn't happen, right? But if I had found in Office Access, right, a bug that could cost the company like 10 or $100 million because it's a security breach, and it was super hard to solve, right? And I just went to my cubicle and I just like, oh, this code like should be refactored, I should fix it, right? And then I just go and fix it and call it a day and go home, and no one knows about it, right? It's like, I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like the tree that falls in the forest and no one hears. So yes, communication is super important. And honestly, I don't think it's that hard to communicate, but at least for technical people like myself, I think the advice is to understand that there is value in communicating, right? Because it's one of those chores that no engineer really wants to do. Like, hey, I want to go in a meeting and discuss stuff, but at least knowing that there's actually value in that, and not just to get promoted, honestly, because that's selfish or whatever, but even helping the company tell is like, hey, I found this bug, like I fix it, and I think it's possible that we should check on other products or on other parts. Like that's also like a ton of value, and usually it doesn't take a ton of time, but so I don't have a specific advice apart from it does happen to be important, unfortunately. and doing it makes sense. I'm sure like there's also the how do you communicate effectively and what's the right time, but at least for technical people like myself, we don't even see that far in advance. We're just like, oh, that's now I would say that now that we're doing a startup and like there's a lot of communicating and effectively and all these things, just looking in the future and not in the past, I think one of the best ways of communicating, and this came from from Gartner, a conference that I attended, is mostly not to communicate even on technical terms or data science terms or visualizations or any of that, but really communicating in terms of business value, right? Because at the end, when you're communicating with someone that is a decision maker or is running a company, it's not that they don't care, but they don't have the bandwidth to understand all the details. So really it's about communicating from their point of view, right? And kind of like having emotional intelligence and empathy and being like, why does Ria would care about my statement, right? And if Ria, if you're maximizing profits on the supply chain, I need to communicate with what's going on in your mind. Is like, hey Ria, like I found a way that where we can increase 30% profits on the supply chain, the level of investment is going to be this much, right? And all the other stuff that I would love to tell you about, like the neural networks that we're going to use and the data analysis that we're going to use, like it's kind of sad from my point of view, but like to make the organization more efficiently, you need to think on the other person that is receiving the message. And it sounds really easy also but it's not also in some other ways, because it also implies that you need to understand what are Ria's priorities, right? And what your interests are and what things are really driving you, right? So there's a lot of, I think in order to communicate effectively, it's less about how do I present in this PowerPoint and more about understanding, what is the person receiving the message really, motivated for, right? And I don't mean motivation in a selfish way, but like as in, in a role in an organization, like how are you helping them? And understanding that is the tricky part. And then you asked the other question, which was models in production, I guess. Would you mind repeating that, Ria? or deployment, right?
Sorry, yes. I was asking you, what does the process of model validation and monitoring look like? Especially, you've built a new product and you need a buy-in for it. So could you tell us a little bit of the timeline? What does that look like?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, and I would say that obviously this is super important, right? And in this session that we're having, you could probably have another session with someone else just talking about model validation and deployment and timelines. It's a super deep, interesting topic, but trying to synthesize all that or summarize all that to the most important things. Obviously, first of all, validating the model is super important because like you want to make sure that it's working properly, and not just when you train it, but also on the long term, and how does it change over time, and what are the implications of that. I would throw in a couple mentions to projects that I've worked in the past, that I like. So for instance, there's a project called MLflow from the Linux Foundation, started by Databricks, really allowed, which is really about, monitoring your model and also deployment and validating that model on production. So there's a lot of tools and best practices that exist out there where you can say, okay, like when I deploy a model, I want to test it on data before it gets deployed to production. And, like obviously that takes time, and it also depends on what type of company you are, right? And what stage you're in, right? In our case, we're a startup, right? So we move way faster than what other companies would, because first of all, we have to, and we're finding market product fit and all these things. But in other companies, if you're deploying like health related, like I would expect that someone like Apple that is doing the health monitoring, what is the fall detection feature, right, on the Apple Watch, like that's like a critical model that if you don't get it right, you could potentially affect people's lives. And then the process is going to be obviously look different, but in some ways it's also similar in the sense that you still want to test it, you want to understand where it's changing, how is the data changing, etc. I was going to say something else, but I lost track. But I would say, I think for us in our startup, we found out that having less process helps us the most. And again, it's not the right call for everyone, but for us, we rely heavily on things like Slack to, even for things like monitoring, right? Which I don't think anyone really is doing, model validation on, or monitoring with Slack. But for us, like we use very simple tools like whenever the model deviates or there's errors or something goes wrong on the production side, just give us a Slack notification, right? And that's something that we really enjoy because it doesn't require us to go log in a complex system and look at all these things. Obviously, it has its side effects, but yeah, I would say that the short answer is that it is very important and it's different on each company. But there's tools that leverage the knowledge that the industry has collected, and they're worth considering and trying them out and exploring them, I guess. Yeah.
That's super interesting. I'll just briefly go back to the thing with the promotion, because I heard something quite nicely, and maybe it's going to help all of us at one point. I know it's not about selfishness or anything like that, but and because you mentioned the right time, and I think they did a research. I can't remember where I was reading this, but they did a research, and apparently at the best moment to talk about your manager about promotion is on Friday before lunch, because they're rushing to get the lunch and they are thinking about ahead of about their weekend, so they won't be they won't be motivated to actually have the discussion in that moment and say and tell you why you shouldn't get a promotion. They'll be more optimistic and more approachable, and okay, yeah, let's discuss it on Monday. So by Monday you'll have the time to prepare your pitch and prepare your points. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I wasn't aware of that, but back to Ria's question of how you communicate effectively, right? Even the timing where you communicate, it's super important, right? And that person is probably on a better mood, already optimistic for the weekend. And if you ask for a promotion on a Monday, when you have the entire week ahead and there's things that broke over the weekend, and your manager's gonna be like, what are you doing, right? Like, go and get some work done. So but yeah, I mean, it definitely depends, and I think it's about understanding the other person. And the fun part of this puzzle is that each person is different, and it's just a whole world on its own. So how do you, but I would say that the caveat here is that I don't know if I would want to also suggest to over communicate, because I've also seen the pattern that there's people that are extremely good at communicating and knowing when to say the right things. And, you can also use that in some ways for your own purpose or your own team, depending, right? And, so, if someone asks for a promotion on Monday, right, that is more hardworking, like X, Y, and Z, and someone asks for the promotion like on a Friday, like all those things actually end up mattering, even though we as people try not to be biased, right? Like, if you're a manager, you get trained to, have a process and calibrate people. But I do think at the end, we're the beautiful thing is that we're people, and like those things do affect us. And like when you're communicating, yes, you want to do it on the most important, in the best possible way that you can. But I'm not sure if also overly optimizing for communication, it's great for a company or for your career, because at the end, but I don't know. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, that's super deep. But I've tried, honestly, my point of view, and I think it has worked for me, is not to worry about promotions at all, because
they'll come naturally.
Yeah, I mean, if you worry about promotions too much, like you end up over optimizing and you lose track of what you really like doing in life and at work. And obviously life is short, and you want to optimize for the things that really make you happy. I would say that in my career at Microsoft, like I got promoted pretty slowly at the beginning, mostly because I was changing teams, and I never really worried too much about promotions. And then it came a point in time where I was in Microsoft research where managers were surprised that it's like, why are you still in this level? And then someone took a look and it's like, dude, you shouldn't be here. Like, let's just fix that, right? So like at some point it became obvious that promotions were overdue or whatever. I would definitely say not to worry too much about promotions. That would be personally me. But communication, it is important, because it's about also getting resources. Maybe you have an engineering problem or a data science problem, right? And like you need more data, right? And you can be very frustrated working on the problem on your own. And you could solve that potentially with communication by explaining the value of collecting that data, and then you make your life easier, more productive, and all these things. But yeah, definitely important stuff.
Yeah, definitely teamwork, and putting, because you mentioned it quite a lot, but putting yourself in the shoes of the others is quite important. So it makes life so much easier, because you need to adapt your way of communicating to the other. Cool. What I would like to briefly talk about as well, because I know you've spent some time working on RStudio and the art. Or like, maybe can you walk us through that journey and how the company was looking like, and how the work, how did you think the work was impacting because it's definitely a tool that we are losing a lot in the stats department, at least I'm coming from. So thanks for all the things that you've developed around it. But yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so while I was at Microsoft Research, I realized that I wanted to do a startup, and mostly, I saw products, and it's one of those things that I've always wanted to do. So I decided to quit my job. We move a little bit out of the city, and that was the time where I was pretty much convinced that I was going to do a startup. However, exactly while that was happening, a friend and colleague reached out and was like, "Hey, would you be interested in working at our studio? Like before you do your startup?" And to me, first of all, I really like working with this person, and the other one is, it felt like a good idea to not do your own startup without even working on a small company first.
That's true.
And at the time, when someone pitched me what was our studio, because I didn't know at the time, what the R community was. So the way that I got explained this was, hey, there's a bunch of statisticians that are using the R programming language, and they need better tooling, and we're gonna help them with that. And I was like, that sounds so awesome, right? But again, like I don't think most people would have that reaction, because statistics, honestly, like, I mean, I love mathematics, and statistics is part of that, but like, it wasn't. I think when I joined RStudio, it was not like, oh my God, data science is the future and all these things. It was like, well, we're doing tools for statisticians. That to me sound awesome, but like I think most people would consider it, oh, you're gonna do tools for statisticians? That's not super interesting, right? So I joined RStudio when still like the company was mostly about statisticians, like, and there were the culture around it outside of our studio was still already starting to think about data science is important, and we can also talk about the distinction between statistics and data science, but they're closely related. I mean, I think the way that the R project defines data science is basically the intersection of statistics and computer science, right? Where you stop doing a lot of the statistics by hand and rely on numerical computer-aided methods to do statistics, right? But anyways, so my journey there started as, let's help statisticians build tools. I work on the IDE, which is the environment where you type R code and execute and look at your reports and graphics, etc. Right? And then after that, the transition was interesting because it became, from a personal point of view, like I felt like I had an opportunity to work closely, on actual mathematics, which I never thought it was going to happen. I worked in Microsoft Research with researchers on the deep learning space, but I've always been like a little bit on the side where, yes, I'm working with a lot of people that are doing, either deep learning or statistics, but never had the chance to really be on the intersection of it. So I had a chance there to work more on the packaging side of R Studio, right? Like building packages for the R community for processing big data on Spark, right? And I took that role and I built Sparkly R, which is a package to use Spark with R, and that was super rewarding. And then from there on, like things also started changing, outside of R Studio and within R Studio, where it became more clear that we were not doing statistics, we were doing data science. And by the way, we're not really doing data science, but we should be doing machine learning and AI, because again, like these terms are, are not very well defined, but like
they're interchangeable sometimes.
Yeah, like the entire industry started really picking up momentum around, data science is cool and awesome, and like we need more data scientists and data literacy in the world. And then at the same time, machine learning was growing on the Python community with, things back in the day with TensorFlow, right? It was still pretty early days, and PyTorch. And there started to actually, as a company, I think our studio had to have a story for the R community on how do we do, more advanced data science, or call it machine learning or AI within the R community. So our team became the team that was supporting and working with some of the researchers like Adam Paske and Databricks with Matei Zaharia, right? Like, how do we bring all the good things that the Python community has built for, say, like monitoring models with MLflow or TensorFlow and PyTorch for the R community. So that to me was super interesting. I started on R Studio thinking something like, I'll probably work 1 year in R Studio and then do my own startup. And I ended up working there 5 years because it was a lot of fun to be building these packages and helping the R community with more things, right? And it's kind of funny that the R community, I don't know about today because I've been a little bit disconnected from the R community on the past few years, but I think at the time, like a lot of statisticians would fight it off and be like, oh no, I'm not a data scientist, I'm a statistician, right? And it's like, oh no, we don't do machine learning, we do statistics and data science. But like at the end, many of the people in the R community are very smart, and like I would argue that many of them are doing machine learning, right? When they build a like XGBoost model or any type of even a linear regression, and they put it on production and all of these things, like the Python community will call it machine learning.
Yeah.
But my personal understanding is like sometimes the R community calls it like, oh no, we're doing data science and statistics anyway. So
no, I agree with that, because I think that's why I choose data science, because I feel like it's okay. I don't need to fight anybody. I'll just say I'm in the middle ground. I'm doing everything.
Yeah, so I do feel like that's why some of these terms are super confusing. Is what is machine learning? I mean, I had a chance of writing a book with my co-founders, Kevin, now in Hal9, with O'Reilly on Spark, right? And on the first chapter, it was probably the chapter that I enjoyed the most defining, because I had to, and I don't, this is my own personal version supported by citations, right? And all these, but like I had to define what is data science, what is machine learning, what is artificial intelligence, right? And if you read that first chapter, I think there's people that wouldn't 100% agree, because again, like things have changed. But like the way that I really define machine learning is basically automating data science, right? Like if you do a linear regression, and yeah, that's my point of view, right? And I don't know. I think other people might have a different one, but to me, like the distinction is, if you do a linear regression on R with RStudio, right, or whatever you want, and you do it manually, and like you look at like the outliers and whatever, you're doing data science. But if you somehow try to automate that process, it's like, oh, whenever like we go to our website, we want every day to like automatically like feed that linear regression or do predictions. That is machine learning. But obviously, to do machine learning, you need data science, and most of the time, to be efficient on data science, you also want to automate things, right? So it's just kind of like the same thing, looked from two different angles. That's how I would define it. Like machine learning is automating data science, and AI to me, and again, this one is more controversial, but is using advanced techniques of data science or data processing, whatever advanced means. Like perhaps today is like things like generative AI or large language models and deep learning. Just like it's not as data science, I would mention it is more closer to proven, well-known numerical techniques. But also, like, as the field becomes more mature, right, like the techniques that were considered AI and hyped become also standard data science tools. Like, sure, use a classifier to train something, right? Like, my guess is that a data scientist today is not afraid to suggest like we should use a deep neural network for this type of class, while like in the past was, oh no, that's AI, right? So anyways, that's my point of view. But sorry, I think I got anyways. So I think this is just to say that it's all related, but in our studio we work on all these type of things, and I think they're all related. Yeah.
You mentioned the book. Is it available on Amazon? Is it an ebook, or how do you find it?
It is, but honestly, I don't want to recommend people to read it, because it's a very technical. Well, it's fine if you want to read it. It's like, but here's the caveat. It's only really relevant if you're doing big data and R, right? So if you don't have big data, it doesn't make a ton of sense. And if you're not working with R and you're working with Python, the book is also not relevant, right? The book was it's called Mastering Spark with R, which is how to do big data processing from R, right? So that's the caveat. So I don't think all your listeners necessarily need to go and buy it, but definitely if you already are using R and love the R packages and the R community, and you're kind of like exploring, okay, like how do I do more complex things, right? I mean, I think that's one of the, it's a good book definitely to read, but I do think that it's very niche, right? It's not about like, AI in the context of the 21st century or something where everyone should read it. It's more, very technical, and only the readers that are interested in the R community and advanced data processing should probably buy it or look at it. It's also free online on the rinspark.com. It's it's all online. It's a tradition that the R community does, where most of the books are available online. But yeah, that's what I mean. Like, not necessarily.
We'd like to ask you about your startup. Could you tell us a little bit about it? What is it trying to achieve, and how is it helping democratize AI, and what is democratization of AI?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm gonna say the very short version. Hopefully people will remember it. So Hal9 is a company that is building a tool for doing data analytics with generative AI. So that's really the short version. And hopefully when people listen to this, if you're doing data analytics and are thinking what tools are out there to be more productive, hopefully they put the two and two together, right? And you can think of generative AI, again, bloated term, but in general, you can think about GPT, and which is a very specific technical term, like in the community. But basically, you can think of tools like ChatGPT or DALL-E or Midjourney, right, that allow you to type a prompt, and from the prompt you generate things, right, images, or in the case of ChatGPT or GPT, you generate text, right, or replies. In the case of Hal9, is that same thing for analytics. So the idea is that you can connect to a data set and say, well, I want to understand well, I'm making stuff up, but like I want to understand sales by region over the past 3 months, filtering out the people with on the high income bracket, right, or whatever. So you write that question, and what we build for you is a report with open source technologies backed on things like R and Python. We use data science tools, and we put it all together. Now that's the short version. The hard question is, okay, how is that related with democratizing AI and where did the startup came from? That is like the super long answer of where we came from and how did we end up doing this. But so the company, when we started, we didn't have a crystal clear definition of what we were doing. You know, if you had asked me at the beginning of the company, like, what are you gonna do? I wouldn't have said, you know, analytics with generative AI. You know, it was very blurry. You know, we were trying to, you know, our goal has been to democratize AI, mostly because, you know, we work in AI, our co-founders and I, and it's something that we care deeply about, like letting more people use AI. But the problem with this definition is that it doesn't really tell you what to do, right? It's like, well, democratize AI does, you know, you could argue that Gmail, when you type something and it auto-completes, it's sort of democratizing AI to some degree because it's making life easier. So the problem I think that we had as a startup was, and many other startups have this problem, is what product exactly do you build with the resources that you have, both, you know, skills and knowledge and also actual timeline and runway from your startup. So that has been like the really hard, challenging thing on our startup. And where we started was pretty nebulous, and, you know, we tried different versions of the product. At the end has been about empowering people that wouldn't be able to do AI before. Early on, when we worked with a few of our original customers, it was more like, well, we don't have the budget to hire a team of like 5, you know, like AI experts to like solve this problem. So like having a tool that would solve that was the promise. And in some ways we delivered, but in some other ways, when you have a new product, you know, like you
need to adjust.
Yeah, I mean, we deliver on the sense that the customers are happy, but the challenging thing is that you have an idea in mind of a product that when I give them to the customers, is going to solve their problems, and then you give them to them, and he's like, well, it only solves 20%, right? And then he's like, what about the other 80, right? So a lot of the journey over the past, now we've been doing this for 2.5 years, has been, well, what is the actual product that customers can come and use by themselves and has value on its own without, you know, having to be involved and babysitting it or, you know, supporting it, right? So yeah, I mean, definitely we can talk a lot about the startup, but, you know, in general, generative AI for analytics, that's what we're doing, and the journey has been long and fun. I don't know if you guys want to drill down into that, but definitely there's good stories there.
I think that sounds amazing, Javier. I'd like to understand, so the product, is there like a generalized version and then a special version catered to the client's interests? Or is it just one product that is being offered to the client? What exactly is it?
Yeah, it's the same product for all clients. The thing that is obviously different, and the problem that we're solving is, and again, maybe by the time your listeners and viewers look at these things, things already changed, right? But like right now, when you go to ChatGPT, right, and if you ask the question, what's my revenue by city on my, you know, Notion database, right, or, you know, or my Google Sheets or something, like that's not possible to answer with ChatGPT because, you know, like they don't have access to private data. They also, you know, like you know, you need something to aggregate it and reports and all that. Things are moving really fast, but yeah, so the product is the same, but really what makes it different is the data that you connect it to, right? Because, you know, Ria, you might have like a data set about X, and Alex would have a data set about Y. So the way that the product is customized is by connecting to your personal databases, right? And obviously, you know, that makes a huge difference. We do get asked the question a lot of, can you improve the product for my own database, right? Like when I put a prompt and I generate a report, could you make it better just on my data? And obviously we're thinking about that, but that problem is super challenging because, you know, like training these and fine tuning these large language models, it's a lot of work, and, you know, it requires like manual supervision, etc. So like we haven't solved that problem yet, but you know, today, like the way that you customize the product is by choosing what data you connect to, and then you can ask these types of questions. But yeah, in the future, probably we'll support something like that.
That's super interesting. I'll just throw a topic that I think is been discussing recently, especially with the context of generative AI and how all the people, because probably the really powerful thing behind it is that anybody can interact with it now, with like interact directly with an AI agent. So it makes people more engaged. And what I was hearing lately is that it's not about how powerful the tool it is, it's in the back, but the customer experience, like the user experience in front of it, because it's really easy to use. You have things right directly in there, answer quickly. So and another thing that I think it's mentioned all in the news outlets now is, how do you feel about the wealth inequality gap? Like, because they were saying that with these tools, the top employees would stay there and they would probably make even more money because they are the experts in their field. But the entry level ones, or the people, I don't know, people that want to bridge into a new sector, they might find it more difficult, because now we have these tools like Hal9 or others that are just doing it for the companies.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to answer the first question, yeah, like obviously the user experience is super important, but at least on our product, it's even beyond user experience, which is almost like the workflow experience. Like,
okay.
In the sense, like, how does everything connect? Because, you know, and this is still like, I think that's kind of like most of the value that we're actively generating in our product is exactly how should this workflow look like, right? Because you know, like if you ask, you know, and if you ask a simple question like, what is my revenue per country? That's something that we can generate very easily, right? You get the results and you get them right. And, you know, it's also removing, you know, tedious work from a data analyst. Like, you really want to build that, you know, Tableau dashboard for aggregating, creating that is like, that's usually painful. And honestly, with work that, you know, it's not very rewarding or impactful. So that part is, you know, it's okay. That's pretty easy. We can automate it, gets done. It's fine. But the really challenging thing is that there is like a gray area on complexity, right? That is not well defined of what you type, right? So you can keep going on the complexity line to, you know, if you do it slightly harder, right? It's like, show me a map, you know, revenue aggregated by city, filtering out X or Y. Yeah, that's still, you know, within the realm of things that we can generate reliably, call it a day, you know, making the data analyst more efficient. The part that is really interesting is, and again, like many of the features that we're developing fall in these categories, like, well, what if I ask something more complex, like, you know, like, you know, I don't know, something, for instance, like, what's going to be my revenue next year on this territory, right?
Okay.
We could potentially generate something, and that this is where we cut the line, and we're saying those types of questions are not supported yet because we're figuring out how they look like. But from a large language model or generative AI point of view, they kind of work, right? But it's, you know, the problem there is that we don't feel yet confident enough, and that you can just let the, you know, in our case, Hal9 and this feature just run wild, right? Because you want to have somehow a workflow where, yes, the user asks that questions, but somehow there needs to be like a data analyst that takes a look at the code and says like, oh, this model is using a linear regression. That makes sense, right? Or, you know, like it's missing to use seasonality adjusting, right? Like, so that part, I feel like what's happening in general, you know, with jobs and roles, I don't think they're gonna disappear, right? It's not like, oh, we're gonna, you know, replace all data analysts or data scientists with our tools. Not at all, right? But it does raise the bar into what you're expected on your job, right? Which in some roles is rewarding, right? Because hey, now I don't think a data analyst is ever gonna get hired to do simple aggregations on Tableau with a bar chart, right? It's like, yeah, we have tools to do that, but like it kind of like frees us to do more complex things, right? Like with a tool with Hal9, we also empower the data analyst, right? You know, that perhaps doesn't know how to code. Now, you know,
to be creative,
like they can look at the code and be like, oh, okay, like that's what it's doing. So like you know, to answer the question, I do think that it's super important, that user experience or user workflow problem where generative AI is part of the solution, but like it needs to be integrated with actual people that validate things, right? And, you know, like, and also things like, well, what happens if a report gets created, even if it's a simple one, right? Like aggregate the data by city, right? And, you know, like if everyone on the company is using that report, maybe even if even though it's a very simple report, maybe someone should take a look at it, right? And that's the
Yeah.
part where, I think is related to your second question of
The human in the loop.
how is that, how is that gonna change wealth inequality and all these things, right? And honestly, to us, like this is a question that I struggle a lot with, because the original idea of the company was, let's empower everyone to just use AI, right? And obviously that's, we're doing some of that with analytics. It's like, let's let do a business user or a data analyst be more productive and really bottoms up do it. But the problem is, like, it always has unintended consequences, right? Which I personally want to believe that they're positive, in the sense that as long as you're empowering people, like people on the individual contributors, either on the business side or on the analytics data science side, to be more productive, I want to believe that the wealth, will remain, with people. I think the part that I worry the most would be, like going top bottom, where potentially, like a company could decide, well, like I don't need a data science team or data analyst team, because I can replace everything with like an automated thing that, I don't know, I mean, that, and also like concentrating resources, where I think I worry a lot about ending up with only 3 companies out there that control all AI, right? And they have the best large language model with, all the talent there, and then a lot of things get automated. So I honestly think, philosophically speaking, my hope is that we empower people to use AI, right? And I think, we're doing a little bit of that with Hal9, but, there's a lot of opportunity for, for instance, someone building a startup that generates lyrics, right, for artists automatically, right? And as long as you empower the artists, to be more productive building lyrics and whatever, like that's great, because now they're more productive, right? And someone like Taylor Swift, I don't think she can be more productive because she's already too productive. But like in theory, she should be able to like do more, right? And my point of view is, like, if you can automate your own job, like, if you can use software to automate this podcast, but you're still the one controlling the podcast and this video, right? You're still at the end receiving the reward of creating these. And so to me, it's about giving tools to people to automate their jobs themselves. That's kind of like where it goes, where at the end, as long as we can automate our own job, then we have a job, because we automated ourselves. So that should work in theory, right? But maybe we close with this, but there's Anderson Horowitz has like a super optimistic view of the world, which I think is worth repeating, because we hear so many pessimistic things on the world. We're like, well, like everyone is gonna get replaced by an AI agent, and we're not gonna have jobs, and everything is gonna go, we're gonna be all out of a job, right? His point of view is that we should view it as we just discovered new civilization. Well, kind of like more of a civilization with like, where all these people, there's 1 billion of agents, right? Like ChatGPT that we can use, that they honestly really don't care about getting paid well. Like, I mean, ChatGPT is just consuming energy and producing stuff. So they really don't care about, higher standard of living or whatever. And we can partner with them to make our life easier, right? So if I'm a lawyer, I should be able to ask ChatGPT questions about my documents, and the cost of interacting with this other civilization is marginal, and we can get a ton of value, and we can move civilization forward faster, and all those things, right? So I think that's a very optimistic way of looking at the world, where we're going to create a ton of value together. And like I think the only danger that I see is that whatever job you're doing, I mean, we're obviously on data science and data processing and analytics, but like any person looking at this video, right? Like if you're a lawyer or if you're in sales or whatever, I do think that you need to try the tools that are using AI, right? And be more productive, right? Like that's kind of like where you want to be, and see how they work and how they apply on your workflows. And as long as you take advantage of those tools, you're good. Otherwise, would be someone like, that is working on healthcare, and they don't decide to understand what are the benefits of using the web, right? And searching research articles in the web. And, that would be, that's probably something that could end your career. Like each time that there's a new technology shift, you probably need to look into what is it good for? How can it make me more productive? But it's not specific to AI. I think we saw it with the web and with mobile, and like you can throw a bunch of other things out there. But yeah, I'm pretty optimistic. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
That's really wholesome, and I feel like that's literally our mission with the Data Science Society, to help people understand what data science is first, and then use it in their daily job to leverage it to increase their efficiency, to make better decisions, and in the end to be. I think in the end it comes down to freeing ourselves from work, like being either being more productive in these 8 hours or whatever when we are studying or working, or just giving us some more time to think about more complex thoughts or enjoying lives more. So I do definitely agree with your point.
I mean,
and yeah.
To add on that, like if we think about Hal9, right? I would like to see a company that says, they listen to your podcast or video, right? Whichever format they choose, and they're like, well, I wish I could do data analysis and data science, but that's outside of my budget. I cannot hire someone, right? But I'm going to use Hal9 to do some data analysis.
Yeah.
Then they, obviously Hal9 does not replace anyone on the data science community or, the data analysts, right? But like they get to it, they see the value, and they're like, oh my God, like this actually produces better results. Like and then they become more productive. And then eventually they're say like, I actually need to hire a data scientist, right? So, this might be overly optimistic, but having like a kind of like a free trial data analyst or data scientist in your organization hopefully leads to more jobs, because now there's like more demand, because it got proven that it makes sense to have a data team and they can onboard more people faster, right? And that's where I would like to see things going. Obviously, we cannot predict the future, but yeah, fingers crossed, I guess.
So I just wanted to understand from your perspective, what does the market size look like for Hal9? For example, we see that, everyone wants to use data analytics for generative AI. Similarly, just talking about, say, banking or healthcare, personally, like when I was part of banking, we saw a lot of interest for, doing POCs on Python and R, but the data security, was such a big issue that we continued working on softwares like SAS. Similarly, we see the same thing happening with in healthcare, where softwares like SAS are used instead of open source, because the primary reason being data integrity and security being the primary issue. So I know that everyone and a lot of the companies want to leverage data analytics using generative AI. And now that Hal9 is offering a closed infrastructure for these companies to be able to use generative AI without compromising, their data security. So what are your thoughts on that? And how, in your experience, what have you seen the client base look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super hard question, the one that you're asking. I don't know how other companies can go straight to the face and say the market size and number times customers equals that, because realistically, if you look at the smallest like market that we can carve, right? Like it's basically the people that we're talking to, like the customers that we're prospecting and where they're exploring a demo or whatever, right? And right now I think we have like 20 that we're actively talking to, and like obviously that should grow. So in a very narrow sense, like our market size is the customers that we're making happy, which is super small, and maybe the company is like ends up being very small or whatever, right? Now specifically, like you can start looking upwards, right? And then when you look at something like Hal9, like first of all, you do need to have some data in your organization. So it's companies, with we're targeting companies with 500 to 1,000 employees first, which means that you already have like a data person, etc. If I recall correctly, there's something like I should know these numbers, but it's something like 20,000 companies like that in the US or whatever. So like that's a market size potentially, and what percent can Hal9 cover? It's obviously there's a lot of competition in this space. But yeah, I mean, the challenging thing is, but I think also the opportunity, especially for people looking at data, is that the data analytics market is a $300 billion market, yearly growing at 30% year over year. Because, like obviously there's tools like Tableau and Power BI and, like many others that obviously there's value in, building tools and also hiring data analysts and data scientists to help organizations with that. And but to me, the most interesting thing is that when you look at the world, there's an estimate that there's about 1 billion people working on knowledge worker, right? So these are people that, like us, right, we're working in front of a computer, and like we're either doing data, or we're moving things on a CRM, or doing emails, or searching the web. So there's 1 billion people doing that, and that's something like a 30 trillion market, of value that goes to the knowledge worker, and obviously that's still growing. My guess that in the future is like half of the world is going to be working in front of a computer or an Apple, like Vision Pro or whatever that is. And really data processing is about automating knowledge worker, right? Like, I mean, so to me, like the market size, and especially with AI and data processing, is pretty much infinite, on the sense that we all work in front of a computer and we want to make our life more productive, right? And scheduling a podcast and all of that, like you can see it as a data problem where, who do we interview? Do we send the email? All these things. So to me, I'm honestly not even worried about market size. I'm more concerned of like, can we make our customers happy, and can we find like the next 10 customers? It's probably not the right answer for someone like an investor when they want like, oh, I want to see an actual number, because the number goes from, like 20 customer to all the world, right? It's like, I don't know, pick something. Yeah, definitely great question. And I would close there to say that there's a huge opportunity for anyone listening at this, either from using data or from becoming a data scientist, data analyst. It's one of the things that I don't worry. Like if we were working on the oil industry, right, I would be like, am I gonna have a job in like 10 years? Like, are we really gonna like keep using oil for many years? Like, I don't know. Like, yeah, or there's probably other better examples than that. But like in the knowledge worker data processing space, AI, like there's so much opportunity that I don't even care about competition. Is if other company wants to do exactly the same thing that we're doing, as long as both companies do a reasonable job, like I don't think this is there's just so much opportunity that I'm just excited in general. Yeah.
No, that's quite a nice overview of the problem. Like it's quite fun. Like I agree. Like we're not in the oil industry. We're not doing that any harm, at least for now. So
yeah.
who knows what's going to happen next. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us for today. It was a lovely talk. Like I know we've gone a bit longer than we were expecting. Sorry for that, with some technical issues from my side. But again, thanks a lot for joining. I'm not sure what time is it now in the US.
I don't know. I mean, it's 11 already. Yeah, that's fun. It wasn't that bad, but I mean, it was a lot of fun. It just like the timing went over, and that's what I mean by it wasn't that bad. The chat was awesome. But
yeah, all right.
I mean, thanks. Yeah, definitely thanks for having me, Alex and Ria. Looking forward to see this podcast and video posted. And looking forward to chatting with you again.